My grandfather left me a worthless piece of land in the middle of the forest. And on this place I built a house and I'm renting it out. At first, my grandfather laughed at me, but then, when my grandfather asked to talk one sweltering January afternoon, I thought he was about to give me one of those life lectures, the kind you pretend to listen to but end up remembering years later anyway. He offered me a freshly brewed cup of tea, pulled a crumpled envelope from his desk drawer, and said, "Here. It's yours now." Inside the envelope was the deed to a plot of land. A patch of countryside in the middle of nowhere, tucked between rolling hills and dense woodland, far from any proper road. You couldn't even get mobile reception out there. It was what remained of my great-grandfather's old estate. No one else wanted it, he said with a chuckle. You can grow some veg or disappear off the face of the earth if that's what you fancy. I gave a half-smile, not sure what to make of it. Was it a gift? A joke? Some late-in-life cleansing of his conscience? Back then, I had just lost my job at a creative agency. I worked in copywriting, but really, I just spent my days dreaming up catchy lines for products I'd never buy. Fired without warning, with no plan and no savings, I slipped into a strange limbo. Friends drifted away, job interviews led nowhere, and rent became a struggle. Going back to my parents' place wasn't an option. Things had never been easy between us, and I knew if I returned, I might never get out again. That yellow envelope and the forgotten patch of land started to seem like an answer. So I went. Took a long-distance coach, then another, and finally hitched a ride with an old man selling cheese by the roadside. I arrived just before dusk. The entrance was just a narrow dirt path overgrown with weeds. No gate, no fence. Just trees, the damp scent of moss, and the relentless buzz of insects. I camped out in an old tent I'd brought with me. Every night, the sounds of the forest woke me and I lay there startled by the depth of silence. But slowly, I adapted. The air was cleaner, time moved more slowly, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel the pressure to prove myself. That's when the idea came to me, I'd build a house. Not just a shack or a makeshift hut. I wanted something beautiful. Simple but well thought out. Rustic on the outside, cozy on the inside. A place of peace for people like me, tired of the relentless pace of city life. A sanctuary. I told my grandfather the plan over a crackly call. It was the only spot on the trail where the signal occasionally worked. He laughed. You're serious? You're going to live out in the woods now? Turn into a hermit? He laughed like I was a kid playing grown-up. And I laughed too, half from embarrassment, half from doubt. But I started. With my redundancy pay and the bit of savings I had left, I bought reclaimed wood, some basic tools, and taught myself how to build, leveling the ground, raising walls, installing essentials. By day, I worked with my hands. By night, I planned how to collect rainwater, where to put windows, what kind of furniture would suit the space. The house took 7 months to finish. No luxury, but it had soul. And something even rarer, character. It was a piece of me built brick by brick in a place most would overlook. Only then did I wonder, what if others wanted something like this too? At first, the house was just mine. I woke with the sunrise, made tea on a portable stove, and read old books I'd packed into a battered box. I began documenting my routine. Simple photos, construction progress, views from the porch, the makeshift kitchen, and shared them online more from habit than hope. And something strange happened. Friends I hadn't heard from in ages started commenting. This looks like peace. I wish I could escape there for a few days. Do you rent it out? The messages started as jokes, but they got me thinking. Maybe renting the house short-term wasn't such a crazy idea. After all, I was getting by with very little. Maybe I could make ends meet by opening the place up to others craving some quiet. A couple in crisis, a writer with creative block, someone just needing a break from the noise. There was space here for all of them. I listed the house on an alternative lodging site. Took new photos, measured every inch, and described it honestly. Rustic cabin in woodland. Rainwater collection. Solar lighting. No Wi-Fi. Ideal for unplugging. 3 days later, I got my first booking. A guy from London named Daniel. Also a former ad man, older than me and clearly burnt out. He wanted a week of silence, reading and walking. I'll admit I was nervous. I didn't know if the place would meet his expectations, if he'd complain about the bugs, the cold water, the frogs croaking too loudly at night. But when he arrived, his tired face lit up. Mate, this is even better than I imagined, he said, dropping his rucksack on the porch and snapping a photo of the sunset. He stayed the whole week, barely speaking. On the last day, he left a folded note on the kitchen table. Thank you. I'm sleeping well again. That hit me hard. It was just a simple cabin in the woods, but somehow it had started serving a greater purpose. More guests began to arrive. Not many, but enough and regularly. A therapist from Devon who wanted to unplug for 10 days. A girl from Bristol who brought her watercolors and spent her afternoons painting the trees. A musician who wrote 2 new songs during his stay. Each guest left a trace. A note, a forgotten mug, a sentence scribbled in the guest book. I found my rhythm again here. That little house reminded me that breathing could be simple. When I told my grandfather I'd started renting it out, he went quiet for a few seconds. Then came that deep, gruff laugh of someone who's skeptical but curious. You're really making money out of that overgrown plot? What are you selling, fairy dust? Peace, I said. Something like that. Well, we'll see how long that lasts, he replied. But it did last. And it grew. I made a few improvements, installed basic solar panels, built a proper composting toilet, and strung up a hammock on the veranda. Instead of trying to turn the place into something it wasn't, I kept its spirit intact, nature, stillness, space to think. I began to make a living from it. Not much, but enough. More than that, it gave me purpose. And in an ironic twist, that worthless plot, abandoned by the heirs, was giving me a kind of wealth I'd never considered before. Over time, something unexpected happened. The house kept doing its job, welcoming quiet souls. But the person changing most was me. At first, I still felt like a shipwreck survivor, grateful to be alive, but afraid of rowing in the wrong direction again. Slowly, though, that place started giving me a new identity. No longer just the unemployed guy from the city, but someone who could build, host, and care. I began seeing my life through new eyes. Once stuck in endless meetings that went nowhere, I now spent my mornings trimming branches, sweeping the porch, fixing a creaky door. And the strange part? I enjoyed it. There was a quiet satisfaction in it all. A kind of success that doesn't show up on a CV but settles in your chest like calm. I started writing again. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Essays about the guests, stray reflections, thoughts I'd never dared share with anyone before. Years ago, this would have been a secret hobby. But here, in this setting, it made sense. It was like the house had cleared some inner space for it. One evening, Daniel came back. That man, my first guest. He quit his job and opened his own design studio. He told me that week in the cabin had been the push he needed. We shared ideas, coffee, and a lot of laughs. And just before he left, he said to me, "You don't realize what you've built here." Maybe he was right. Or maybe it was just an outpouring of gratitude. But the thought stayed with me for days. Because in some way, this place really did change people. Or maybe it just reminded them who they were, before the rush, before the goals, before the bills. And then, one day, my grandfather showed up. No warning. He drove his old pickup into the clearing like he was just there to fetch some firewood. He climbed out slowly, wearing that long-sleeved shirt that was now more patches than fabric. I was sweeping dry leaves off the veranda when I looked up and saw him, arms folded, staring at the house like it was a mirage. "So this is where you've been hiding?" he asked. "I wasn't hiding," I said. "I built this." He didn't reply. He walked in, looking around in silence. He ran his hand along the wooden walls, tapped the floor with his foot, stood by the window and looked out at the view. For the first time, he seemed a bit lost for words. This is beautiful," he finally said, voice softer than usual. "I didn't think it would turn out like this." I nodded. Didn't say much. His visit made me oddly nervous. Like I was still waiting for some kind of validation. But I didn't ask for it. I just offered him tea. We sat on the veranda. He sipped it slowly, eyes on the woods. "You remember how I laughed at the idea?" he said, not looking at me. "I thought it was just another one of those wild dreams young people have. But now I think maybe you understood something I didn't." I stayed quiet. Because hearing that from a man who had spent his whole life in the countryside, someone who always thought real success belonged to city folk, meant more than any other compliment. That's when I realized this land wasn't just an inheritance. It was a kind of loose thread between generations. A space for pause in a world that never stops. A place where calm has value and where, without even noticing, I had found my own footing. After his visit, something inside me settled. Not because I needed his approval, but because I finally felt that what I was doing wasn't just me resisting, it was me building. Something real. Something mine. And that feeling only grew as the bookings did. The cabin began popping up in small circles of word of mouth. Someone would post a photo, tag the place, and soon enough another message would arrive. People looking not just for peace, but for authenticity. No infinity pool. No Wi-Fi. No filters. Just silence, forest, a hammock, and a notebook. Then one day I got a message from a journalist working for an alternative travel site. She wanted to write about unique places to stay, and someone had recommended the cabin. I hesitated, as I always do when it comes to visibility, but in the end, I agreed. She stayed 2 days, asked a few gentle questions, scribbled lots of notes. Before leaving, she said she hadn't realized places like this still existed. 2 weeks later, the article went live. Simple title: The Refuge That Grew From Nothing and Became Everything for Those Seeking a Fresh Start. The response was more than I ever expected. The calendar filled up. Guests started arriving from all over the country, from all walks of life. A man in a business suit cried watching the sunrise. A woman spent her 60th birthday reading quietly on the veranda. A father and his teenage son stayed, trying to rebuild their bond. Each left behind a story, and I'd stay up at night, writing about them. I began turning those stories into short essays. Posted them on a modest blog. The feedback was warm and honest. Comments from strangers who saw themselves in those words even if they'd never set foot on that patch of ground. And then my grandfather returned. This time he brought tools. "If we're going to do this properly, we'll do it together," he said, as if we were fixing the roof of a chicken coop. We spent 2 full days building a wooden staircase leading to a natural lookout point. At the top, the valley opened up wide and beautiful. As we worked, he started sharing old stories. About my great-grandfather growing coffee nearby. About the time he skipped school to go fishing in the stream. About almost selling the land but backing out because he couldn't bear to let it go. The land wasn't worth anything, he muttered, still not meeting my eyes, until someone believed in it. It was the first time I'd ever heard him talk about me that way. That night, we sat together on the veranda. The full moon cast long shadows through the trees. He lit a cigarette, an old habit my gran had always tried to break, and said, "You know this isn't luck, right? It's work. And vision." I didn't say anything. But inside I was smiling. The same man who once measured success by the size of the field now respected something intangible, the kind of space you create when you listen to your gut, even if the world laughs first. The next day he drove home with a rosemary cutting from my porch. "I'll plant this by the veg patch," he said. "They say it keeps tiredness away." That's when it hit me, this wasn't just a plot of land anymore. It had become a meeting point. Of generations, of ideas, of people learning to hear themselves again. And me? Without realizing, I'd become the bridge for all of it. It was on a gray afternoon that things started to go wrong. The weather forecast had mentioned rain, but nothing out of the ordinary. The house was ready for it, roof sealed, drafts sorted, dry firewood stacked. Still, something felt off. That kind of quiet tension you can't explain, but can't ignore. The guest was a man named Alex. 33, a designer with the hollow-eyed look of someone who hadn't slept in weeks. His message had been short: "I need 3 days to think." Just think. Strange, but not unusual. Many people came to the cabin like that, needing silence to untangle something they couldn't manage at home. When he arrived, he looked worn out. He asked very little, thanked me a lot. I showed him around, explained how everything worked: LED lamps, filtered rainwater, zero phone signal. As always, I warned him, "Don't leave the trail. It sounds simple, but the woods can swallow you up easily." The next morning, it poured nonstop. The forest thickened, muffling every sound. I had to pop into town to sort a problem with the gas cylinder. When I got back in the afternoon, I noticed the front door was ajar. I called out, knocked, waited. Nothing. His rucksack was still there, but no sign of Alex. I started searching nearby, hoping he'd gone up the trail to the lookout. Nothing. I checked the stream. Still empty. That's when panic began to creep in, but I tried to stay calm. I left a note on the table: "If you're back and I'm not here, please call me as soon as you have signal. I'm out looking for you." I waited until nightfall. When it got fully dark, I rang the local police. 6 hours of searching followed: torches, dogs, local volunteers. The forest was deceiving quiet, but full of steep drops, sharp branches, and false clearings. With every step, the sound of my own fear grew louder. They found Alex around 3 a.m., lying in a patch of ferns, soaked and shaking. He was disoriented. He said he'd heard a strange sound, followed it without thinking, and got lost. Tried to find the trail back, but it vanished. Then he slipped, hurt his arm, and just waited, hoping someone would come. He was taken to hospital with mild hypothermia. The next day, I got a call from his brother, grateful but clearly shaken. He said Alex had been battling severe depression, and this trip was his last effort to find clarity. I spent days processing it all. The cabin had always been a refuge, but now it had been the scene of something far more serious. For the first time, I questioned if I was ready to handle that. If I was responsible enough. If I should continue. I told my grandfather everything. He listened in silence, stirring his tea slowly. "Do you think you did something wrong?" he asked, without judgment. "I don't know. Maybe. I should have noticed something. Should have paid more attention." He nodded. "We always think we could have done more. But you went out there. You looked. You called for help. And you saved a man. That's no small thing." Then he fell silent again, staring out at the woods through the window. Just remember, everything living needs a bit of shade. Too much light can blind you. That line stuck with me. The cabin wasn't magic. It was just a place. But because it had become a shelter, it had also become a mirror. And not everyone is ready to see themselves clearly. In the days that followed, I wrote a letter to Alex. Nothing grand, just letting him know he was welcome back anytime and that there was no shame in getting lost as long as we allow ourselves to be found. It took a while, but he replied. Short, simple, I'm not ready to return yet. But I haven't forgotten that you found me. That was the first time I truly understood that what I built wasn't just physical. And somehow it involved me more deeply than I'd realized. Looking back now, I see that the greatest gift my grandfather gave me wasn't the land itself. It was the freedom to try. To make mistakes far from the eyes of others. To build something without a manual, without a deadline, without an audience. A patch of ground where I could just be myself and where, slowly, others began to find themselves too. The cabin is still there, nestled among the trees. The roof's been patched up, the veranda expanded, and there's even a small greenhouse now where I grow mint, basil, and a little chili plant that somehow survives the winters. Guests still come. Not as many as before, but they stay more fully. People who aren't running away but searching. Sometimes not even sure what for. I get messages from guests who stayed months ago saying they still dream of the scent of the wood in the mornings. Or the sound of crickets at night. They say that in that silence, they finally heard something they needed to hear even if they're not quite sure what it was. My grandfather, slower now, visits often. He brings homemade cornbread, sits on the bench on the veranda, and mostly stays quiet. Sometimes he chats with guests. He doesn't say much, but he smiles more. The other day he asked if I'd ever thought about building a second cabin. Near the lookout, he said. Something smaller, tucked out of the wind. I mulled it over for days. Not because I want to grow, but because maybe growing here means something else. Maybe it's not about more money or more bookings. Maybe it's about going deeper, not wider. I've also started organizing the stories I've written, snippets from guests, reflections I've collected along the way. An independent publisher showed interest. They said it could become a book. Not a bestseller. More like one of those books you stumble upon on a forgotten shelf and take home without knowing why. Maybe that's what this place has become, one of those stories that suddenly makes too much sense. The funny thing is, when people ask me now what I do, I still stumble over the answer. Saying I rent out a cabin in the woods sounds too small. But I don't see myself as a businessman or an author or an entrepreneur either. I think I'm just someone who chose to stay when everyone else was leaving. Who chose to listen to the silence even without knowing if it would answer. And in the end it did. Not with formulas, but with space. Space to think, to change, to fail, to start over. That land no one wanted now has a waiting list. But that's not what matters. What matters is that, to me, it has a name. And a story. A story that began with disbelief, wandered through doubt, stared down fear, and stayed. Not as proof of success, but as a reminder that sometimes all we need is a corner. A small corner of our own. Where the world can breathe a little. And so can we.